do mine as well.
Hello, I'm Mark Chatterton, and this is my Rock Pages YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to interview a promoter for a change. I've known this guy for over 25 years now, and he's been promoting for a lot longer than that. I'm sure he's got plenty to say about his life as a promoter, as well as the various other things he does, including writing, composing, and being a DJ. So a warm welcome to Pete Feenstra.
Hello there, Mark. Great to be here.
Right. For the people who are listening in, you're not actually in England at the moment. You're down in the southern France, aren't you?
Yeah, not the Côte d'Azur. I'm in southwest, which is
yes,
is very rural and very rural and very quiet. Although we got a great gig up the road from here, but of course, with the current situation, it's not working, sadly. So
yeah. Well, we'll come on to that in a minute about the present situation. But let's go back to your early days. What was it that got you into music in the first place, and who did you like in those early days?
Well, how far back do you want to go? I mean, first 3 records I bought was 1963, which was the Beatles, the Tornadoes, and Billy Fury. Three for £1 it was in those days.
All right.
But I was very much a Beatles fan in the early 60s. Huge influence on me. Then Spencer Davis Group. Then eventually Frank Zappa, the Kinks, the Hollies. You know, the usual kind of people.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing happened with more proggy thing with Jethro Tull and the Groundhogs and Man and all those sort of bands. And then the West Coast thing happened. You know, I became a big West Coast American fan. Psychedelia, blues. I was always into blues as well. And but actually, the turning point. I should say this. Yeah, the very thing that there is a turning point that got me into music was this. And I've said this so many times. It was the Ollie Beak and Fred Barker. Remember those glove puppets?
Them, yeah.
Muriel Young. I can't remember the name of the show. But anyway, it was those glove puppets, and they had a house band. And I used to love the band, but I never liked the singer because I was only 9 years old and his voice was too gruff. And of course, it was Alexis Corner's Blues Incorporated, and his voice was. But the band was just unbelievable. I think it was Dick Hextall Smith, Jack Bruce, and all kinds of people like that, you know.
Yeah.
But it was rhythm and blues, really, and I kind of liked that, even at 9 years old, you know. But I didn't know what it was, but I got into it, you know.
So, what was the first gig you ever went to?
Now, I was trying to work this out. Well, certainly one of the first ones was a free festival in Nottingham at the side of the Thames, and it was Trent. How did I say that? And it was Family and Rory Gallagher. They were in fact, Rory Gallagher was probably headline, and Family was it was a joint headline, really, because an awful lot of people came to see Family because they were just up the road in Leicester, obviously, and a lot of people went to see Rory as well. So I think that was the first really big one. But I went to the Boat Club in Nottingham quite a few times, you know, and I saw there's a local band called Orphan, and I remember seeing Nicky Moore very early on with Hackensack. That might have been a year later or so. And then I saw Procol Harum at the local Poly one time. And then there was a huge festival before that, which I heard, but I couldn't get into because I was underage, at Meadow Lane, Notts County's football ground. And that was a funny one because that was a mixture of, really great bands like The Move, Pink Floyd, Fleetwood Mac, but also bands like Marmalade and Amen Corner. And so it was a mixture of pop and rock. It was just that crossover time, you know. So they were the early ones anyway, but I can't, you know, I would say probably that festival I mentioned was probably the first one.
Yeah, because you said you're from Nottingham originally. Did you move straight?
I was from Rotterdam. I was born in Rotterdam.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise that.
But Rotterdam, then Belgium. Yeah. But I kept going back and forth because my mum was English and my dad was Dutch or Frisian. And but it was when I was 9 years old when I started buying records. Really, that was the And just to finish that off about the festival there. The problem was, and the same applied to Steve Winwood as a musician. You couldn't get into clubs because we weren't old enough. He's older than me anyway, but you could get into, especially a free festival. You could do that, you know, and a few other things like that. Anyway, there we are.
Yeah. So you were brought up in Nottingham. Did you move
Yeah,
straight down to London after that, or did you go away to college or anything like that, or what happened?
yeah. Well, actually, Nottingham. I should start in Nottingham because that's my first gig. I kind of semi-promoted this because the whole background to you're going to ask me how did I become a promoter? Well, I had no
You
idea what I was
beat me
going
to
to
it.
do, and I fell into it. But this is kind of relevant because I was still in Nottingham in 1973. We just left shortly after that, and there was a competition on BBC Radio Nottingham, and they wanted you to either write in or vote in. I can't remember which one it was. Uh, to make a suggestion as to which band you wanted to see that they were going to promote. Okay, so I did this huge kind of thing at the time. All my mates, everybody could think of, let's get Man, let's get Man to come to Nottingham, and they did. I don't say we won it, but we got them to. And they counted the votes and said, "Oh, they want to see Man." And of course, having done all this, I set up this Nottingham Man fan club at the time, and I thought, well, we've got the band there now, so we better make sure there's a crowd there. So I suppose that was the first time I really set about promoting stuff, even though it wasn't my money. I mean, the radio station were paying for it, but I spoke to the guy, Ashley. I can't remember his second name now. Ashley. Anyway, he's a great guy, and that was at maybe the Grand Hotel. There's something hotel in Nottingham. Anyway, that was during a 3-day week, and then the next day I went to Selector Disc, the record shop, and as I came out, there's a guitar shop or music shop 2 doors down, and then I bumped into Will Yowett and Phil Ryan, who were coming out of the shop at the time, and then they took me to the Market Square in Nottingham, which is outdoors, and that's where I met Barry Marshall, who was managing them at the time, who became Martial Arts and became a very big news in the rock promotion thing. But anyway, even though I did that, and even though I really enjoyed it, I had no idea what I was going to do. So the next best thing was I used to go and see loads of bands and hang about and go backstage and do all that sort of groupie, do all that sort of stuff. So even back then, I knew a lot of musicians, and then I went to university in Leicester, and I hated the idea of becoming part of a committee, which was the worst move in my life, because if I'd have joined the music society or whatever, I could have had access to thousands of pounds and booked all the bands I really love, But instead, we still did some gigs in various colleges and various clubs and stuff like that. But where was I? So that was, I'd left Nottingham by then, so that was Leicester for a few years. And then in the middle of that, I went to the States and did a few gigs over there on the West Coast at the Keystone Club in Berkeley, San Francisco. That was a lot of fun. And I actually did a free festival in Kentucky, in Lexington.
Yeah.
Met a load of people there, and I thought, well, this is great, but I still had no real idea what I was going to do. Anyway, I'll get into it now because you're going to ask me anyway, how did I get into promoting properly? Well, anyway, after I finished at Leicester, I went traveling for a couple of years. I went all over the place. I went to India, here, there, and everywhere, Middle East, and ended up in Copenhagen in Denmark. Now, the significant thing about Copenhagen is it's a 24/7 city, or it was then. It's fantastic, But the thing is, I got a job as a dishwasher, not literally washing, but great big machine in this place called the Treyfolk Hotel, which is quite a famous place because there's a theatre next door to it. And I was on 3 times the money that I was earning in Britain at the time, so this was great. And anyway, the whole place was run by, the music side of it was run by Iraqis and Irish, and they had a fallout and they needed somebody to read the contracts. And a mate of mine was there, and he said, "Oh, do this." And so he didn't have to, he just had to make sure that everything was there because they basically hired the place out to whoever was doing the shows. But the shows were, people like Rod Stewart, the Kinks, Santana, C.V. Jurgensen, which is a great Danish band, so on and so forth. And amongst many surreal things that happened while I was there, there was a German chef there. He said, "Oh, you ought to come up. There's this big rock star coming to see me." I said, "Oh, yeah, who's that then?" He goes, "His name's David Bowie." So I'm in the kitchen. In waltzes David Bowie. And he says, "Oh, what's that you're cooking?" to the chef, and the chef goes, "Oh, it's a special onion soup." He says, "Oh, the guy, and Barry goes, "Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. You must give me the recipe for this." You know, he says, "Oh yeah, I'll sort it out with you afterwards. This is the chef." And off he goes with his entourage, shuts the door, and the chef goes, "It's straight out of a tin." With a bit of this and a bit of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was there for 6 months, and it was great. I had a real great time. I met, and I did some promoting in Christiania, which is the big outdoor commune over there, in the biker bar there. And it was fun. But then I thought to myself, well, I've got to come back to Great Britain and get a proper job, you know, and try and do something. So anyway, cut a really long story short, I ended up at the BBC for about 6 months, maybe a bit more than that. But it was maybe 9 months, but it was all, which was great. I met lots of famous people and lots of funny, but this is nothing to do with music, not very little to do with music, but used to have lunch with Ronnie Corbett and Johnny English. I've forgotten his real name now. The guy with the eyes.
Rowan Atkinson.
Rowan Atkinson and all these people, and Sam Kidd, who was a character actor, and it was great. Because the thing that the BBC was, unless you wanted to go outside to a restaurant on your own, everybody ate in the same place, because it was mainly because it was subsidised food. So everybody, you know, that was that. Yeah. But anyway, and then I worked. Yeah.
So what were you doing at the BBC then?
Well, I was a researcher. I got in there because I forgot to mention this, because my actual trade, I became a music librarian. That became my special. But I was library information. I got a postgrad thing in library and information science, and the whole of that profession got shafted. I mean, what happened was all the people with the computers made the money, and everybody else. But nonetheless, I got into the music side of it, and this is how I got into promoting. Right. So what happened was, I ended up. No, I'm still at the BBC. Sorry. So I worked for the BBC Film Library. That's how I got into the BBC. And what you did, you catalogued all these bits of film and audio things. So I found all these things on the radio. I thought to myself, where's the John Peel sessions? And that's when I discovered that they taped over them. They didn't have them anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And luckily, his wife. This is quite a common knowledge, but his wife at the time bootlegged some of these tapes and took them home, you know. And if they hadn't done that, all that music would have gone. Anyway, that was that. And then I ended up doing a bit of research on Jim Will Fix It and Blue Peter and Take Heart and things like that, which is quite interesting. But this was all short-term contracts and no holiday pay. So I thought, no, I've got to do something. So I did this postgrad thing on library information science, and then I got a job in Southwark to start with, and then Hounslow. Southwark, I was a music librarian. I'll speed this up, and then in Hounslow I became specialised in music. And after about 2 years of this, and I really enjoyed that, I loved it, you know. After about 2 years, that they started this thing called outreach, which was a really good idea. How to get people into libraries through non-traditional ways. And what I mean by that is they do things like. You bring in guest speakers. You could bring in sports people, musicians. That's how straight in there. I booked a load of musicians and all the rest of it. And we set up a film society, and you know, all kinds of things. And then video, not DVD. No, it was videos came out at the time, and all this sort of stuff. And then eventually, about a year later, they said, "Oh, we're also going to extend this idea to using council buildings, you know, for the arts, basically." And cut a really long story short, they gave me a barn of a place which became Felton Rocks, which was a 600 capacity venue, next door to some tower blocks that nobody ever wanted to go next to. And so I started booking bands. So this would be sort of 83, 84, something like this. And anyway, before that, when I'd come back to the UK, and this is when I was a record buyer as well. I had access to, you know, a huge budget, and it was great. I could buy all the albums I liked, as long as people came into the library would borrow them, you know. And my lending figures were much bigger than anybody else's. This isn't an ego trip. It was just the fact I was giving people what they wanted. You know, we had this week's hot charts and things like this, and people loved it, you know. And anyway, as a result of all this, I got this barn of a place called Felton Rocks, and I brought Walter Trout over, and I brought all sorts of people. We had Canned Heat over there. They hadn't been to the UK for a million years. and it was going great. And nobody, and it was making money. And you're not supposed to make money really for local authorities. It's meant to be just a service for the kids.
Yeah.
But anyway, just before I did this, I thought to myself, bearing in mind that it's 79 onwards, and bearing in mind, I was thinking to myself, I've been away 2 years and punk happened and everything else. But all those bands that we all used to like are still here. And all my contemporaries at the time and the bands at the time were still there. So I thought, well, put 2 and 2 together and see what happens. And of course, people came out of the woodwork. It was like punk never existed, Of course, it was like they'd all gone underground for 3-4 years, and now they popped back up again. It was cool again to see really good bands, So anyway, that was quite a successful thing, that Felton Rocks. Then they gave me Chiswick Town Hall. I did the same sort of bands, 9 Below Zero, Ruthless Blues, Roger Chapman and the Shortlist, Michael Caton, who came over, Pat Travers, Sherman Robertson, all these kind of bands. The Hamsters, of course, I nearly forgot them. Otis Grand and his Dance Kings, as it was in those days. And of course, around about the same time, we're talking about 86 now, I suppose, the whole industry took off. The record labels, the CDs had just started coming out. Beer companies were investing in adverts with blues-related products like jeans and beer and stuff like this. Heineken Big Top took off. They started investing in live music. And it all came together in the mid-'80s. And the M25 was built, which meant that tour bands could get to places quite easily. It all kind of came together at that time, And I was really fortunate because then they gave me the Brentford Fountain Leisure Centre. I mean, I did the blues band there. I did Webb Wilder and the Beatniks there. I did a load of different bands. And then around about that time, I started an agency up with Greg Upchurch called Urban Rumour. We looked after the Blues Burglars, which is Paul Lamb and the Kings. Became Paul Lamb and the Kings. So it was Paul Lamb at the time. We used to go to Europe with that, and then Kokomo, and after that, a band called Paul Mouth with Jackie McCauley and Clive Bunker. And suddenly we were doing all these tours of Europe and the UK and everything else. Anyway, so that was that. That's how I got into it. Anyway, I could go on forever like this, but And by the time, the Felton Rocks thing lasted 7 years, and it was great for me because they gave me a budget, left me alone, and it all worked really, really well. And by the time, things inevitably changed. By the time everything changed, I left there with quite a good database. And about a week later, I'd also been doing this gig at the Brentford Boogie Club, little club in West London. And then I got another barn of a place called the Bottom Line in Shepherd's Bush, which held 1,200 people.
Which is where I first came across you.
I think it was, yeah. And it was an Irish venue at the time.
Yeah.
And they introduced me to a whole new Irish scene, which was great. But I had to make sure that, I had to tell them, I said, this is great. But I said, this is a 1,200 capacity place. We've got to book some bigger bands that people know. And so we did. I mean, we had everybody from Niels Lofgren to Walter Trout to, Manfred Mann's Earth Band. And we had this celebrated gig with Def Leppard, which is in the Guinness Book of Records. But I've got to tell you something. It's in the Guinness Book of Records because they did 3 continents in 24 hours. So they played breakfast in Morocco, Shepherd's Bush for lunch, and Vancouver at night within the same 24 hours.
Yeah.
And of course, they did it. They broke the world record for 3 gigs in 24 hours. But what did the Guinness Book of Records do? They put it down as being Shepherd's Bush Empire. Now, they're meant to be sticklers for, everything's got to be perfect. And they completely and utterly balls it up. I mean, people were sleeping in the streets all overnight to get in because it was a limited capacity because of there were 12 terrestrial TV stations from all around the world for that, And still managed. Anyway, so I did 2 years at the Bottom Line, which went really well. And then I moved next door to the Empire, which was bigger still. And we did even bigger bands there, which is really, really great. And I lasted there about 1.5 years, I think, and then it became a PLC. So then it all became about money, and so interested in that. And then after that, I went to I started the Worcester Park Club around about that time. Yeah, which would be 96 or something like that, 97. And then 98, 99, I was at the Mean Fiddler in Harlesden before they moved to the Astoria, which was great working for Vince. He taught me a lot of different things that I didn't know. And then eventually when they moved to the Astoria and they shut down, I went like completely independent then. Although I did do another 10 years at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon, had 2 5-year stints with Don Mackay.
Yeah.
So this will bring you up to about late 90s now, and then I was did 7 or 8 years, did really well because it was gateway to Surrey.
Yeah,
we were on VH1. We were on we had the Yardbirds there. We had Walter Trout there. We had everybody, the same sort of bands really, and it worked. We had the Wimbledon Jam with Pat Cash with 400 sellout. Although John McEnroe never showed up, but it was still a fantastic event.
Yeah.
And then that eventually shut down for reasons I can't go into. And then one of the people used to come down there said, "Oh, there's a great football club has got a great room in Sutton," and it became the Boom Boom Club around about 2002, something like that.
Yeah.
And 18 years later, I'm still there.
Yeah.
And since then, I've also done, I think, 14 years at the Beaverwood, and I did 12 years at the Torrington in North Finchley, which I took over from George Blevins, who ran it for 30 years, I think, or 35 years, something incredible. And we also did Rocking at the Rainers, which was a Northwest London venue. I did that for about 15 years, 2 different stints in that. And in all this time, and I'm going to plug my book now, in all this time, this was 40 years I've been doing this now. And people said when punk came along, that was the end of it. But, I and a lot of other people will tell you differently. And of course, we're still going. And I think around about 2000 early 2000s, I joined Mystic Records as well.
Yeah.
Which was an independent record company. And then I brought my promotion wing along with the record company and the agency. So all 3 came under the one umbrella for about 8 or 9 years, or even 10 years, possibly, something like that. And we signed up, people like Colin Blunstone, Canned Heat, Carl Palmer, heritage rock bands, Mark, things like that. Which is really what we're talking about on this show.
Yeah.
It's the fact that, I go back to when I came back to the UK, and it's all about the fact that, it was quality music. And I interviewed Manfred Mann last week, and I said to him, he put out this album in '78 called Watch, and he put out a single, California, the week before, a couple of weeks before. I said, wasn't that a chancy thing to do with punk? He said, look, I was old 10 years before punk. Punk had no bearing on what we did. We just carried on. And particularly people like him and Roger Chapman were huge in Germany and the continent. Yeah. And fashion and the music business fashion, it's only really in Great Britain where it's ever been that important. Now, having said that, even though, people in Germany are incredibly loyal to the bands they love, that's the good upside of it. That's the great side of it. But the downside of it is you could speak to, say, Andy Scott Sweet or Roger Chapman, any of these people that played Germany for years, and you say to them, what was the support band on that? What were they like? And one of them would say to me, well, it was different. And I said, what do you mean it was different? He says, well, it was an Oompa band. The Germans would have no problem with going like this to an Oompa band and then listening to a prog rock band or a rock blues band. No problem at all,
Yeah.
Anyway, there we go. So
I suppose over the years you must have got into the thousands of gigs you promoted, would you say? It's got thousands by now.
Oh, yeah, a lot more. Actually, I've written it down.
Yeah. I
should have done that, but I have actually written it down for this book.
Yeah.
But I did work it out. It's basically. You mean the ones I've promoted or the ones I've seen?
Yeah, the ones promoted. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I would say. The thing is, it's very difficult to give you a ballpark figure because I was looking back when I was doing this research in this book, and for about 7 or 8 years, I had 3, maybe 4 gigs a week, but on 3 of those nights, there were actually instances when, particularly when I was working with George McFall, where we'd have 4 gigs in one night, So, yeah, a lot of gigs.
And
yeah.
Are there any sort of particular favourite bands that you've worked with over the years, would you say?
Well, yeah. I really, when I brought Walter Trout over in the early 90s, in 1990 or thereabouts, in fact, an agent did it, John Jacobson, I think, but I promoted his second ever gig, I think it was. And I spent a lot of time making that happen. And then a guy called Mick Schofield in Blackpool did the same thing. In fact, he did it before me, but I did the first London one. And then he, when he turned up, and it was just brilliant, and then it was so good. The next one we did was Walter Trout and the Hamsters, and it sold out at the drop of a hat. And then at the end of the night, I said to the crowd, I said, well, this is one of the greatest gigs we've ever done. I said, how about if we do this again tomorrow night? And everybody goes, yeah. I said, no. I really went on a wing. And I said, I'm serious. Buy your tickets tonight and we'll do it. And of course they did. It just went right up. And we did it the following night, and it sold out again. It was just so that was that one. Then there was a guy, Sherman Robertson, who sadly died recently, and I did his second ever UK gig. I think Mike Vernon did the first one in Southend, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Producer, and then we did him at Felton Rocks the next day. It was absolutely fantastic. Larger than life guy, and he was just something else. And then another one I must mention, which is a completely left field thing. In the mid-'80s, I was in the middle of Russia, and I met this Asian guy called Ahmed something or other. Lovely guy. I can't remember his name. I'll remember his name in a minute. Anyway, it turned out he was from Swansea, and I said, I know everybody in Swansea. I said, oh, yeah, do you know Martin Ace and Man? He goes, oh, I know Martin Ace and Man. And we got talking, and of course, through him, I got to know Peter Singh, the Rockin' Sikh, when I came back and he hadn't worked for years, and I looked him up, and he'd gone back to running his curry house, and he'd had this hit record, don't smoke dope, don't drink bourbon, all I want to do is shake my turban, rocking with the Sikh, the Indian Elvis. And then I realised he'd been working with Martin Ace and a few other people, and I thought, this could work, Anyway, because I was at, this is a killer story, because I was at Hounslow at the time, because I had access not only to the money for Felton Rocks, they gave me money for looking after ethnic minorities, And I said, well, we ought to have the Rockin' Sikh. There's all these Indian kids want to see Indian rock and roll, and here he is. And when these old guys came from the temples in Southall, which is just up the road, and they said, gave it their blessing, and everybody. And when I sold it out, it was fantastic, and the place was rocking. And they made a documentary on which I was on Channel 4, Rocking with the Sikh. It's on YouTube if you want to check it out. And it was Mickey Jones on guitar, Martin Ace on bass, and then they toured with Dave Edmunds and everybody else, The Clash, people like Southern Death Cult, as they were called at the time. Anyway, having done this, I then turned around to the authorities and I said, well, having done this, he said, I said, we ought to do some blues now, what do you mean blues? I said, well, ethnic minority, Afro-Caribbean, blah, blah, blah. So I got Jimmy Witherspoon, didn't I? And I got all them, and I didn't sell him out. It was very, very busy, so that did well. And then I turned around and I said, by the way, how come you're not spending any money on the biggest ethnic minority in Hounslow? And I said, who are you talking about? And I said, the Irish. And of course, every time I booked an Irish band, it sold out straight away, because all the people that used to go to pubs, all the Irish music fans that used to go to pubs, were now no longer in their 20s. They're in their 40s and 50s, and they wanted to sit down with their missus and things. And we had this theatre, the Robeson Theatre. I did the guy at the Chieftains the night of the hurricane. Remember the big hurricane, the late 80s? The guitar player at the Chieftains. He said, and we still pulled 150 people that night with that raging hurricane going on. He said, geez, if they're coming out on a night like this, they'd charge double. Anyway, that was so for 7 years, Mark. Anyway, they're all memorable gigs for me for different ways.
Yeah, sure.
And then, of course, I got to mention the first 2 gigs I did in a pub in Tooting with Joe Bonamassa, when nobody really knew who he was. Yeah. I think we had 75 the first time he played there. And the second time, about 5 days' notice, we did about 140, I think. And then the third time I did him at the Boom Boom Club, I did him twice there. It was 300 sellout.
Yeah.
You know, and then you just knew he was going to go places, you know.
Yeah.
And the same with Walter Trout after the Felton Rocks gig. He was such a great guy. When I started Worcester Park, he played for me there. When I did Mean Fiddler, everywhere he played, you know. Did Shepherd's Bush Empire about 4 or 5 times. And we did Fairfield Halls, Croydon. It was fantastic. Every single time it was fantastic. But and I did the Mean Fiddler. I've got to mention Scotty Moore, of course. You know, Elvis's guitar.
Yeah.
Where you know, he could hardly play anymore because he had arthritis and everything else. And he had DJ Fontana on drums. But he had, you know, we must have had 50 famous guitar players in the room that night.
Yeah.
Just paying homage to him, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And another thing we did when I was back in Felton, we did this, being a big Man fan, we did the first of 4 Welsh conventions, I think we did in all. 1 at Historia, 1 at Fairfield Halls, and 2 at Felton. And, you know, Man hadn't done anything for years, and did it with Michael Heatley from the Welsh convention. And they sold out. It was fantastic, you know. And it just proved a point, you know, all these people who love their music, you know. And of course, I've got to mention Roger Chapman, who I convinced him to do gigs in England again, or Britain again, you know, because he'd been doing great in Germany, but he'd hardly played here at all. And he was saying, "Oh, nobody be interested in me." I said, "There will be, you know. Everybody's coming back now, you know." And, And I'm not pretending I was instrumental in kick-starting all this, but you know, I remember when I was doing all these gigs, there was one guy did the 100 Club, and you know, and there were the big things, but there weren't a lot of other things. The other gig I've got to mention, because I ramble on, was Luther Allison, who played one of the greatest gigs of my life at the Brentford Boogie Club.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, awful Wednesday night or something like that, and it was rammed. And he went on stage at, I think, 8, and he came off about 11:45 or something like that, way up time, and it was just dynamite, absolutely dynamite. And then he played for me again at the Bottom Line, actually. You know, absolutely. And he sadly died, but he was killer. But there's so many, but you know, your favourite gigs for different reasons. A lot of them are personal.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just try to put across really. And I'm sure I've missed out loads I should be talking about.
Yeah. Getting back to Roger Chapman, you put the family reunion on at the Shepherd's Bush Empire a few years ago.
Along with Don Mackay.
Don Mackay did it as well. So were you instrumental in getting them back together, or was that something they were thinking about?
No, anyway? Don was instrumental in talking Roger Chapman into getting it together. But because I'd had quite a long relationship with Chapman going back to it was about 25 years, I suppose, something like that. And I'd promoted a lot of shows with him, with Roger Chapman, the Shortlist, and it had been building and building. And we thought, and my only reservation at the time was Charlie Whitney couldn't be there because he's kind of lives on the Greek island, hasn't really played any professional music since he's been there 25 years, I think, something like that, you know, 20 years, something like that. And without him, but I thought, people will come out for this, but I seriously wondered about the legacy and could they do the job? And they really did. It was fantastic. In fact, they put together a 9-piece band. It was like an orchestra, really.
Yeah.
Family and the In-Laws, I think, or the Outlaws or something like that. You know, and they had Jeff Whitehorn and Nicky Payne on saxophone and Paul Hirsch on keyboards. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Ollie Palmer, of course, everybody. And I was amazed, but we did that process a couple of times. I did 3 nights with the Zombies at Shepherd's Bush as well for their 40th anniversary. And it was the same thing, you know, that night, you know, Paul Weller showed up and Robert Plant showed up. And the same thing with family, all sorts of people, you know, Frank Worthington came on stage, the football.
He introduced him, didn't he? Yeah,
and then we had to get him off. And but you know, everybody came out of the woodwork, and it was just, you know, it was actually, I tell you what, Mark, after it was nearly up to 40 years of you know, I've been doing it a long time by then, and I thought, yeah, this has made it all worthwhile. You know,
Yeah,
a couple of nights like that. You know, and so yeah, to be clear, no, Don was instrumental in putting it together, but I promoted it and
yeah,
promoted the hell out of it, and it worked. You know,
that was the other thing I was going to mention, because obviously, apart from all the promoting, you've done quite a bit of writing over the years, and you actually wrote a book about family, didn't you, for a box set?
Yeah, that took me 9 months, and what started a labour of love was really, I could do a whole radio show about that in itself, with all the weird contacts that led to other contacts all around the globe. And I ended up, in fact, Charlie Whitney, I talked to him via letters. You know, we used to write to each other. That's the way he preferred it. You know, things like that. And then there was ex-members who hadn't been heard of for a million years. And I went up to Leicester and I searched through all the local history archives and things, right back to when there were the Farinas and things like this, when it was coffee clubs, you know.
Yeah.
And all-nighters like the Night Owl in Leicester and places like this. And you'd be wondering, how could these people stay awake all night on coffee, you know? It was, I know, it was, yeah. And but then as I got closer to delivering the book, and there were a lot of people wanted to write that book, so I was kind of, you know, there's a lot of pressure. But I think I'd done my research. I think I'd, you know, done the job.
Yeah.
And then, of course, not only did I have to deliver it to the record company, Snapper Records, whoever it is, but it had to have the okay from Roger himself, you know. And then, anyway, he sent me a phone me a personal email. He said, well, I've got to say there's stuff in here I didn't even know myself, you know. So
yeah.
And it won an award at the Prog Rock Awards, you know.
Yeah.
Which is great, especially for the record company who had faith in everybody doing it, you know. And we also did one on Streetwalkers as well, actually, which wasn't as big a project, but that did quite well. And then I did one on Walter Trout, because I did this Walter Trout benefit gig at Shepherd's Bush Empire when he desperately needed a new liver, and it was really touching as to whether he was going to make it or not. And really, that book was about how we scrambled together a gig in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, you know, and an incredible lineup of you know. In fact, Roger Chapman was on that, you know.
Yeah.
Bernie Mars and all sorts of wonderful people, and that was another book. And now I'm doing one about 40 years of all this, which I've been doing for 5 years, and I'm on chapter 5 because it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah,
I've got tons of this stuff I've got to, you know.
Yeah, sure. And have you had plenty of time to do that recently with all that's been going on?
Well, I have, but without kind of, you know, getting into it too much. I've also, you know, I've written about 3 albums worth of songs here, which is, and when
because that's something else you do as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And when you get into writing songs, it's not something you go boof 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 and it's done. You know, you do something, and when it's really going, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
You've got to sit down and really go with it. So that took up a lot of time, and the fact I got locked out. I'm in Southwest France now, but I got kind of locked out from. I came back from here to do a load of tour bands in the UK, and they all got cancelled. And then I tried to come back here, and I couldn't, you know.
Yeah, I remember you were saying you were stuck. Yeah.
And then I moved, so that was another thing. But yeah, I've got to get back in. But of course, what you normally do, as you well know, when you're writing a book, you probably go up to the British Library and do all your research before you start writing. So you can't do that. You can't even do it online at the minute.
No.
And so I'm going to have to kind of just bite the bullet and just go with source material and the interviews I've done, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
It'll be all right. But you know, I know with the family thing, there was so much stuff that you uncover.
Yeah.
And the fans love it. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. But you know, you've got to give people the context for why the band did so well or why it didn't do so well.
Yeah.
What happened, which is the whole idea of this book I'm working with now. The fact that, you know, in fact, I tell you, around about 79, and it didn't come out till 86, but I wrote 2 chapters for this Bob Brunning book called Blues, the British Connection, and which is all about all the obvious people like Clapton, Rory Gallagher, Fleetwood Mac, Stan Webb's Chicken Shack, Chris Barber Band, all the people from, you know, the British blues boom onwards, Manfred Mann, everybody. But the influence was with that book that come 79, when they first started working on the project, that was the end of it, you know, that there was no more. And it's true, in 1979, at the club level, there weren't that many gigs. But the whole thing, one of the things you can read about in my book, by the way, is that a load of bands started in 79 who later became well known, like 9 Below Zero, the blues band. Roger Chapman's solo career kicked off. Loads of bands like that. Loads of record companies that became very significant a few years later. It was also started in 79. And it imperceptibly built up to the mid 80s, where it all came together with a big bang, really, you know.
Yeah.
To the point where, as I said earlier on, you know, you had Heineken, Big Top, you had you know, Johnny Hooker. You couldn't catch a cold in the early 80s, and then by the mid 80s, when the Healer came out and all this, it was all big news, all because they were advertising the old blues guys on beer adverts on the TV, you know, and things like this. And
Yeah.
I don't know how I got to that point now, but rambling on. Sorry.
Yeah, because you've always been associated with the blues, and you've actually won a few awards for your work as
I have, and I'm eternally grateful. I'll tell you something, and anybody that tells you different is lying. If you make a radio show, particularly, well, now's a very good example when you're completely isolated or nearly isolated. But even back when I first started doing this, you start putting together a show, you start building an identity, a musical identity, and your own identity, and all the rest of it. But still, you don't know. You put it out there, and you hope that somebody's out there. You market it, you let people know about it, of course. But you still don't. It's not until people start interacting with you and sending you messages and this and that. And the other.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got a phone call, and there's a lovely guy called Darren Wheel, who's a really good marketing guy. And I was in France at the time. He said, "Pete, you've got to come to Newark," you know. And I said, "What do you mean Newark?" You know, he said, "Oh, it's a great festival there." I said, "Yeah, but it's a long way to go just to go to a great festival." "Oh, no, it'd be great." Anyway, to cut a long story short, the fifth phone call, you know, and I said, "He said, we'll take you up there." And I said, well, it'd be in your interest, you know. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" You know, and I looked it up. I'm not here. I looked it up, Newark Blues Festival, and I said to my partner, I said, "Oh, you know, it was an awards thing." And I thought, oh, maybe, you know, so we did go up there, and I won. And I tell you, it was great. It was a beautiful, it's right by the castle, and there was Del Bromham Stray there, and there was the Nimmo brothers were there. Sorry, it was before King, Ian Siegel, all these great people, and about 3,000 people there, you know. And then suddenly you realise that, why have you been broadcasting all this stuff? And it was the first one I won was for the what do you call it, Lifetime Achievement Award, you know.
Yeah.
And suddenly you realise that, not just me, by the way, everybody that won an award there, musicians and the like, you know. Del Bromham won, and Tony McPhee, by the way, won Lifetime Achievement Awards for music, you know, being musicians and everything, which is great, because people like that should, you know.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for so long, and they've been doing it so well, you know. But you wouldn't see them in the press anywhere, not since Sounds and the like finished, you know, all those years ago. So that's great. So I won that one, and then I've won a few since, but I won the European one, which was a funny story in itself, because I was in the middle of nowhere again, and Pete, I just phoning you up to say you won this. I'm going, wow, this is incredible. Anyway, I will tell you this, and this is a very honest story. So anyway, there was some debate about how did you get these votes, and is this kosher, and all the rest of it, you know. Anyway, when they announced the votes on a Dutch radio station, they said, you won this, Pete, and a Dutch guy won, I think it was the Moulin Blues Festival, which is a huge festival, you know, thousands of people there. And Kyla Brox won the Female Blues Award, and all the rest of it. Anyway, the Dutch guy, when there was some discussion about the votes, he said, well, I said, I'm very grateful about winning this award, you know, and thank you very much. And he said, but I would have been surprised if I hadn't. And the DJ said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, think about it. He said, we have thousands of people at this blues festival, you know, and as long as people like the music I'm putting on, if I tell them I'm up for this award, chances are they will vote for you, you know. and which is precisely what happened. And I'm sure Carla Brock said to all her fans, vote for me, and they did. And so of course I've got people listening into my radio station myself, and I've got people that come to all my gigs, and you say, look, this is happening at any chance, and and you are part of a community, it's when it's not. It's trust me when I say this. It's not about the ego. It's not about because it's all about just marketing the music that we all love. It's a niche. It's heritage rock and blues. It's a very small niche, and we're all getting significantly older now,
Yeah.
So any shape or form that you can, that you can promote this stuff is great, and and it is. And honestly, I've got to say, hand on heart, it does knock you back when people do come out of the woodwork and support you like that. It's great. Yeah.
Which brings me to the present, with obviously the virus and the lockdown and everything. When do you think things will start getting back to normal? And
well, I wish I could tell you. It's
quite difficult, really.
I wish I could tell you.
Yeah.
I would think. You see, you'd have to rephrase the questions. Well, you have to define normal, because I think normal is going to be, one of the things about the new normal will be how many people are they going to let you have? That's you're still going to have to social distance up to a point, I imagine. You've got, you've still got the masks and everything else. I mean, Ian Anderson said the other day he won't perform in a theatre now when he goes back to playing if people in the audience aren't wearing a mask, because he's got a bronchial problem and if he gets it, it'll kill him.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that, but and you've got the problem at a club level where you've got air conditioning and all the rest of it. But then I thought about that, but then again, there doesn't seem to be too much of a problem flying all around the world with reconditioned air.
Yeah.
So I don't really understand. There's so many of these kind of ponderables, But and then you've got the thing at the moment. I'm going slightly left field here, but you've got things like streaming. Now, I think streaming is a very good idea in two ways. One, it keeps the community going. It keeps the musicians, the people out there can support them, and that's all great. But live gigs, for me, have always been about clubs. I mean, there's theatres, there's arenas. I don't really have a lot of interest in arenas and stuff like that. It's all about sharing the moment. It's all about a communal experience. That's all it is. Good, bad, or indifferent. I was there. Did you see the night when Stan Webb did this, or when so and so fell off stage, or played brilliantly, whatever it happens to be, and that's what it should be. Now, streaming is an interim kind of thing. I think that's great. And of course, musicians need, apart from all that, they need a way in which to keep their voices going, because it's a muscle, just like muscle wastage, just like your legs and arms and all the rest of it. They need to perform, you can't just start up again and hope that your voice is going to be the same, because it's not. So it's a long-winded way coming back to answer your question, which is, I think hopefully late September, October, possibly. But I think it's going to be dependent, obviously, on how effective the vaccine is. Then there's going to be the question. I'm a promoter. I'm being very honest when I say this. There's going to be the question about. There's going to be 20%, I think, of people. For example, there's going to be a load of people who can't wait to come out to gigs, and I think at the beginning there'll be a great big upsurge, and it'll be great. After that, the economic reality will kick in because. People are being severely hurt at the moment. And there's also going to be 20% of our regular audience, if not more, because they're of a certain age now, we all are, who are going to be a bit circumspect about the health issues. They are. So that's going to be the role of the vaccines, isn't it? It's going to have to be, the authorities are going to have to be very, very clear about this, and they're going to have to be very honest about the figures, and and very consistent about the figures to get people's confidence. That's the only way I can put it. Because we nearly had some shows in October, and they got pulled right at the last minute, and it cost the clubs a lot of money. They brought in all the beer, they did pay for the risk assessment, brought staff out of furlough, and about a week's notice they were told they couldn't do them. Well, that can't ever happen again.
No.
We go out of business, but it's very, very, very difficult. I don't know what the answer is. It might be the case, being a bit more positive, it might be the case that in the summer, you know, for example, last summer I did see two socially distant outdoor gigs in Gravesend, which were very good, you know. But it was quite a big place, and the stage and everybody was kind of spread apart. You know, it could well be more of that. But that's, you know, when the weather changes, that's, you know, you can't do that again.
No.
So I really don't know, Mark. I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, we're all raring to go like never before.
Yeah.
But it's not just music. I mean, it's restaurants, it's cinemas.
Yeah.
You know, it's a whole leisure services industry. You know.
Yeah.
And you can I'll happily go on record and say that, you know, I don't think the people in charge have got any conception of what the industry is.
Yeah.
You know, and on top of all of this, now you're being hit by the extra charge now, you know, for visas and things like this to tour Europe, which is going to kill people.
Oh yeah, that's another big question, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a political thing. I don't want to get into.
Yeah. No, sure. Yeah.
Really, but you know, if you're out there, folks, and you support live music, you know, just do whatever you can to keep it going. Buy albums. That's you know, if you can.
Yeah.
In fact, people apparently are buying albums, because I've spoken to a couple of independent record labels who do the stuff we like, and that's been going all right, because of course we're the last generation now of the physical products, CDs and vinyl. You know, our kids' generation are download only. You know?
Yeah.
So when we go, that'll be the end of it. And, well, not the end of it, but you know. But right now, everybody's sitting at home and they want something new to listen to, so they're still buying stuff, which is great.
Yeah.
It's about the only way anybody's making any money.
You know? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know, and the other thing I've not mentioned again, well, I did mention age, is that, you know, a lot of the performers we know and love, they're going to lose 2 years here in their career. You know.
Yeah, that's right.
Their golden autumn. Well, we should all be in the golden autumn now, and it's, you know, that's another unforeseen thing that's happened, unfortunately. You know.
But as soon as everything sort of clears up, you're quite happy to put on gigs again and get going, I take it.
Yeah, as long as it's, as I say, I you know, I've got self-interest here. I want to stay healthy. You know, I want it to be right. And if I'm the person whose name is attached to the show, you know, I've got a responsibility for everybody that comes in through the door to know that we've done a proper risk assessment, to know that we've done everything we should have done. You know, so I want it all to happen, but it's not going to happen until it's done properly.
No.
You know, and the immediate problem I have, again, I'm being very honest here, is that, you know, I'm being asked to commit to different bands at the moment, and then my answer is great, yes, you know, let's pencil a date, but you know, we've got to look at the figures here, see how many people we can have, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But to make any sense, you know, to everybody.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is, everybody knows that the live music circuit has shrunk down the years. I mean, you know, bands that we used to see in 1,000 capacity venues are now playing, you know, 300 capacity venues or whatever.
Yeah.
And it might even be smaller still. You know, I don't know. Maybe everybody will go back to acoustic singer-songwriter stuff. I think it's already happened with the new generation.
Yeah, definitely.
It has. Everything's become more introspective. And when you think about, I mentioned the download generation there, you know, not only are they only interested in download, they're only really interested in one song.
Yeah.
Right? Hold that thought, because when we all started buying records, Mark, we only bought one single, didn't we?
Yeah, sure.
We never bought albums unless you really wanted a Beatles album, and even the Beatles albums had 5 or 6 covers and the 4 hits.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And it wasn't until 2-3 years later you had concept albums, and that you had the whole concept of the concept, you know, the whole idea of an album of music, you know. But we've come full circle with that whole download thing. Is a parallel to, I think. And back in those days, before the Beatles came out, it was singer-songwriters, you know.
Yeah.
And it's happening again now. You know, it's all. It's, what do they call it? Not shoegazing, but you know, when you're looking into yourself more, and it's more.
sort of introverted and whatever.
And we live in those sort of times, you know.
Mm.
Music reflects social environment, doesn't it?
You know?
You don't have heavy metal so much. Well, you do. There's new generation heavy metal players, but you don't have so much in terms of people coming from heavy metal cities that, where they have steelworks. It's all gone. Birmingham, Port Talbot, whatever else it happened to be. And music reflects society in that respect, doesn't it?
Right. Well, one final question. Obviously, you were saying about we're all growing older and etc. How long do you think you're going to keep going for? Have you thought about that?
Well, the simple answer to that is as long as I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And do I still enjoy it? Yes, I do. But I'll tell you one thing. Two things actually. Would I do this job if I was doing it for money? No. Trust me when I tell you that. And anybody who's been doing this as long as I have, doing it, with the same passion. I like to think the same passion. Would tell you exactly the same. If you come into this to make money, you can make money, but it's a different thing entirely. But also, it became a very, very big thing to me in the old days when I came from Denmark. And as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I was rambling and I said, I remembered all these bands from the 70s that we all knew and loved, and I was still there with my peer group of music lovers and all the rest of it. And the fact that I could join the dots together and do it as a job and make money as a living, but also, more importantly, for it to all work. And when you haven't done it before, and when you consistently do it, and you think, wow, this is. But the hardest thing I found was after about. And I found that you'll laugh at this, but when I was an agent, right, you're there to make money as an agent, but I'd like to put good bands in with good clubs and make it all happen. But when you've achieved that, and when you've gone to a new club or new festival, you've got to do it again and again and again. And try and build the money up and try and build the profile of the band. Well, it becomes a little less interesting as time goes on, unless you move up to a different level. That can be interesting, of course. And I've seen it with certain bands and all the rest of it. But it's still just as interesting if you can bring on a new young band and have them do well, or flip it the other way. If you can pull an old band out, dust off the cobwebs, pretty much like Pete Barton's done with the Skegness Rock and Blues and the Giants of Rock in Minehead and all that. He brought back the Yardbirds from nowhere and the Animals and bands like this, and he's done 20 odd years of this now, as well. And he proved the same thing. He's a parallel kind of existence to me. A lot more bands today. He's brought bands from the 80s. Well, the 80s to me doesn't seem that long ago. But so I think that's I'll carry on doing it as long as I enjoy it, and I do enjoy music. I mean, I enjoy the social side of it. The fact we're still. I mean, we'll probably end up being like the old. When I first started, incidentally, I never told you. When I first started promoting music, some of the music I was doing was the old trad jazz people. From Kenny Ball to Chris Barber to George Melly to George Chisholm, all these people. But I'll tell you this thing: the rock generation. I don't like saying this. The rock generation got older a lot quicker than that old trad jazz generation. They used to be up there bopping away all night. They did. Even when they hit the 70s, they were all, and then eventually it became sit down things. In fact, I even did gigs. I used to do gigs with Russ Conway, and he was in theatres, and all the women wanted to get up and dance. I remember it all quite clearly. The whole, But anyway, that's really as long as I still enjoy it, really. That's it. And here we all are. Let's hope we can get back and do what we all like. That's really what.
That's right. Well, thanks very much, Pete, for that and enlighten us on your life and all that you've done and etc. And let's hope we'll see you again in a gig somewhere soon.
And you, Mark,
later this year, definitely.
Catch up for a beer soon.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on. Really good.
Thanks, then, Pete. Okay. Cheers.